The lava tubes of Elysium Mons lay in silence. 18 months earlier, 60 Chinese settlers had arrived here, carving out a colony beneath the rock, shielded from radiation, hidden from the harsh Martian cold. Then came the disaster that would change everything between the colonies. It began with a sharp crack. In seconds, the ceiling gave way. Rock crashed down. Red dust filled the air, choking, blinding. The habitat shook. Robotic trucks lay crushed under stone. The oxygen plant, their lifeline, tore apart with a metallic scream. The main communication system was buried. In the dim glow of emergency lamps, settlers clawed through rubble, pulling each other free. They rushed to the rovers, dragging out oxygen tanks and hauling them inside. The tanks were hooked up to keep air flowing, but everyone knew they would not last. Every breath from one mouth meant less for another. Time had turned against them. They had no time to wait for Earth. Their only hope was Mars itself. Engineers tore into whatever they could find: rover panels, wiring, battery packs. With hands shaking from dust and cold, they built a crude antenna. It wasn't pretty, but it could reach the satellites above and send one desperate signal into the silence. SOS, the message crackled upward. Lava tube collapse. Oxygen critical. Immediate aid required. Arcadia Planitia. Respond. Far across the plains, Commander Voss saw the signal on his console. He did not hesitate. No debate, no vote. He gave the order. 6 rovers were loaded in record time. Oxygen tanks, spare pumps, heavy tools, even a portable 3D printer for shaping brackets and pipes on the spot. The convoy rolled out. Each rover carried 4 settlers, trading off at the controls so the column never stopped. Their machines ran on compact RTGs, steady power cores immune to dust and darkness. The distance was brutal, 1,600 kilometers across rough Martian ground. They drove through choking dust storms, wheels hammered against ancient lava ridges. They slipped down crater rims. They climbed steep inclines that pushed the rovers to their limits. 3 times the crews allowed themselves no more than 30 minutes to stop, just enough to stretch, eat, change drivers, and check the battered wheels. What should have been 30 hours stretched into nearly 2 full days of relentless struggle. Sleep came in the stolen minutes inside shaking cabins, while outside the red world clawed at every meter of their progress. At last the convoy reached the shattered lava tube. Dust hung in the air like a red fog. The habitat walls bent under fallen rock. Lights flickered weakly. Shadows moved inside, survivors waving for help. For a brief moment, the rescuers sat in silence, staring at the scale of the disaster. Then, without a word, they grabbed their tools and ran. They held up broken walls. They sealed leaking pipes. Fresh oxygen hissed back into the choking habitat. The 3D printer kept making small metal supports. Rovers were turned into lifting machines. They worked until their hands hurt and their voices faded. But they saved the habitat. They saved lives. Commander Lin placed a hand on Voss's shoulder, her voice low but steady. You came when we needed you most. Mars will not forget this. And on Mars, something fragile took root for the first time. People once divided by flags and headlines now shared the same wrench, the same air, the same fight to survive. 26 months after the first landing, the sky over Arcadia Planitia lit up again. Bright streaks crossed the thin Martian air. More ships arriving in the narrow window between Earth and Mars. This time, 200 settlers came. Twice the number of before, twice the workers, twice the mouths to feed. They brought rovers, power units, and ready-made shelters. Soon the base spread wider across the plain. Greenhouses glowed with LED light. Workshops echoed with the sound of drills and printers, but growth brought problems. More people meant more strain on food, water, and oxygen. Some of the new settlers were restless and careless. They skipped steps, broke rules, or treated orders like advice. Commander Voss noticed at once. The first crew had survived by strict discipline. Now he had to teach it again. When a team skipped safety checks and broke a rover wheel, Voss made them repair it themselves in the freezing cold. When a scientist stole water for his experiments, Voss sent him to clean filters for a week. Slowly the lesson sank in. Mars punished mistakes without mercy. By the end of the first month, Arcadia had doubled in size and grown into one unit. It was no longer just a camp. It was the seed of a city, held together not by Earth's orders, but by rules made in Martian dust. By the 38th month, Mars again decided to test their mettle. It began as a faint haze on the horizon, just another dust cloud. But this time it did not fade. The sky grew darker each day. The sun turned into a dull red glow behind the storm. Gradually, the storm had spread over half the planet. Within days, it was everywhere. A blanket of dust wrapped around Mars, turning the sky into a rusty twilight. At Arcadia Planitia, the solar panels stopped working. They were covered in thick dust, useless. Greenhouses dimmed. Plants withered without light. Batteries ran low. Heaters struggled. Every machine coughed red grit. Commander Voss ordered rations. Lights were turned down to a faint glow. Work crews moved in short shifts, wiping filters, sealing cracks, fighting to keep the habitats alive. In Elysium Mons, the Chinese were safer in their lava tubes. The rock above them blocked the worst of the storm, but dust still slipped in, clogging oxygen plants and covering equipment. Their power flickered, air grew thin. Russians had built their colony at the North Pole. They faced another kind of danger. The storm carried fine dust into their icy shelters, coating vents and seals. Heaters groaned against the bitter cold. The walls did not shake like they would on Earth, but the constant hiss of dust and the fight to keep the ice from freezing their systems wore them down. For the first time, messages began to pass between the colonies. Not orders, not reports, simple words, comfort, advice, a reminder that they were not alone. The dust is endless, the Chinese said. It slips into every crack, every machine. Our wind turbines are freezing, the Russians warned. Stay alive, Voss answered. Hold on. We'll survive this together. The storm lasted nearly 3 months. When it ended, Mars looked different. Sand dunes had shifted, landmarks were buried. Solar panels lay under red drifts. But the colonies were still there, tired, scarred, alive. The Russian colony had always been the smallest, just 30 souls clinging to survival at the frozen pole. Sleep came in shivers, rationed between the endless labor of keeping heaters alive and scraping ice for water. They were exhausted, but they endured. Then the great dust storm rolled across Mars. It buried panels, clogged vents, and filled the very air with grit. The heaters coughed against the bitter cold, fighting a losing battle. Days stretched into weeks, and still the storm did not break. Their plan at first was simple: endure, strive to keep breathing until the storm passed. But the storm lasted too long, stripping away what little strength remained. By the fourth week, they knew if it raged another month, they would not survive. Supplies dwindled, oxygen ran thin, and frost crept deeper into the walls of their shelters. At last, they swallowed their pride and reached out to the other two colonies, asking for guidance and for help. After long consultations, the three commanders reached an agreement. The Russians could not hold the pole. Their base was failing. Once the storm ended, they would abandon it and begin the long march south. At the same time, a joint convoy from Arcadia and Elysium Mons would head north. The distance between them was immense, more than 4,000 kilometers of dust, craters, and broken ground. With luck, the two groups would meet somewhere in the middle, carrying enough supplies and oxygen to keep everyone alive. Once united, they would return to the lava tubes and build again. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance. Russians survived the storm, but they were broken to the core. When the storm finally broke, they felt new energy of hope and began preparing for the march south, stripping what little gear they could salvage from their frozen outpost. At Arcadia, Voss loaded 6 rovers with supplies and oxygen tanks and drove east to Elysium Mons. The convoy rolled into the Chinese colony at dusk, headlights glowing against the cavern walls. That night, the two crews shared a meal, quiet, heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The next morning, 12 rovers stood ready, 6 American, 6 Chinese, their holds packed with food, water, spare parts, and enough oxygen to sustain dozens of lives. Engines rumbled in unison as the convoy pushed out into the pale red light. From the north, the Russians began their own march. 30 settlers in worn machines, red suits sealed tight, every kilometer a test of endurance. And so the rescue began. Their tracks stretched across the barren land like twin scars. They saw wide plains open to the horizon, scarred with craters and ridges of black rock where ancient lava had once burned. Each mile revealed a world still unknown. During short rests, the crews ate quickly and checked their rovers. In the dim cabins, Voss and Commander Lin spoke in low voices. At first, they talked only of logistics, fuel, oxygen, distance covered. Then their words turned to the future of Mars. They agreed survival would depend on more than luck. The colonies would need open communication, leveled tracks between Arcadia Planitia and Elysium Mons, and regular meetings to plan together. Dust storms swallowed their vision, turning day into an endless twilight. Rovers lurched down crater rims and clawed up ridges of black stone that strained their engines. Wheels hammered against hidden rocks. Sleep came in stolen minutes, heads resting against vibrating walls while the red planet clawed at every kilometer of progress. The convoy stretched the journey as far as it could. They drove longer each day, covering more ground than planned, because they knew what waited ahead. Russians running low on air, their oxygen thinning with each breath. Supplies dwindled. Time was running out. Far to the north, the Russians began their march from the polar region. Their rovers groaned over icy ridges, wheels slipping on frozen regolith. Dust and frost coated every surface. They rationed oxygen carefully, stopping only when necessary. Inside the cabins, Karpov counted each canister and whispered words of reassurance to his exhausted crew. "Keep going. Every mile brings us closer to warmth, closer to life." When they finally glimpsed the American and Chinese convoy on the horizon, smiles broke through exhaustion. Many wore red spacesuits and came out of their rovers. They waved, flying kisses were thrown. Laughter carried across the Martian plains. Chinese and American engineers moved quickly, unloading supplies and sharing oxygen and food with the Russians. They crawled over the weary rovers, checking systems and repairing damage from the brutal trek across the pole. Only when every issue was fixed and every crew had eaten and rested did the convoys turn back together, bound for the safety of Elysium Mons. They returned to Elysium Mons, weary, dust-stained, but not without hope. The three crews shared a meal: dry rations, hot tea, nothing more. At first there was silence. Then Commander Lin spoke, her voice steady but tired. "Earth only sees what we dig out of the ground. Metals, isotopes, shipments. They never ask how we live here." Karpov gave a bitter laugh. "The same for us. Moscow demands fuel from the ice we dig, yet they don't send enough heaters to keep us warm." Voss nodded slowly. "Washington too. They want uranium, deuterium, but survival comes first. Without that, there's nothing to send home." For a long moment, no one spoke. A Chinese engineer brushes dust from his hands and murmurs, almost to himself, "Perhaps Mars is ours only while we hold it." Voss and Lin exchange a glance, the weight of their shared struggle understood without words. Weeks after the rescue, Arcadia Planitia stirred with a different kind of urgency. Not alarms, not warnings, but whispers of something miraculous. In Habitat 3, a young couple had done what no one had dared to dream. A healthy child was born, the first child of Mars. The news spread like fire through the oxygen lines. Engineers left their stations just to hear it confirmed. Farmers in the greenhouses froze, hands buried in a Martian soil. The Russians pressed radios to their ears, listening to the echo of joy. Commander Voss made a choice few expected. This moment would not belong to Arcadia alone. He sent word to Elysium Mons, to the Russians now sheltered in lava tubes. "Come," he wrote simply. "This is for all of us." And so they came. Chinese rovers rolled across the plains. Russian transports followed. For the first time, all three colonies gathered under one dome. Music played from Earth's archives. Lights glowed warm against glass walls. Tables were lined with hydroponic greens, yeast bread, and bottles long saved for a night worth remembering. Settlers laughed, shared stories, passed the newborn gently from arm to arm, each whispering blessings in their own tongue. For one night, Mars was not a prison of dust and storms. It was home. When dawn came, celebration gave way to something deeper. The council chambers quiet, the dim light reflecting off Martian dust on the floor. The commanders lean over the table, tracing maps and notes. Voss tapped the old rover blueprint. "Every day we survive here, we prove what Mars can sustain without Earth. If we coordinate, share resources, and protect our own, we might actually build something lasting." Lin nods, her pen hovering over the maps. "Not for Earth, not yet, but for us. For Mars." Karpov adds quietly, almost reluctantly, "Then we need rules. A charter. A guide for when we're not just surviving, but planning for generations." Their hands rest briefly on the same maps, fingers brushing the coordinates of the colonies. No dramatic gesture, no trope, just the silent acknowledgement of shared responsibility. But the commanders were not finished. Lynn's eyes narrowed. If Mars is to endure, it must be more than colonies tied to Earth's chains. We need self-reliance. We need a vision. Karpov folded his arms, his voice rough. My people survived on ice and stubbornness. We have to abandon our colony because we had little supplies. We need technology, parts, medicine, but not at their price, not as beggars. Voss nodded slowly. Then we make it plain. The resources of Mars belong to Mars. We will trade them, yes, but only for what we need. Advanced technology, medical supplies, spare parts, the knowledge to sustain ourselves. No more one-way shipments, no more orders shouted from Earth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of heaters filled the silence. At last, Lynn said softly, "Then it is decided. We will keep this pact between us. To the settlers, to Earth, we announce only the calendar. But here, in this room, we set the true course of Mars." 3 hands met in the center of the table. 3 oaths sworn without ceremony. They sketched a new year, one shaped entirely by the Red World. Not Caesar's months, not Earth's empires. 11 months would mark the Martian cycle, each nearly twice as long as these on Earth. Days would be souls, slightly longer than an Earth day, keeping time in tune with Mars itself. And the names drawn from Mars, from its moons, plains, storms, and lights. Solara, for the sun that still gave them life. Phobos, the faster of the twin moons. Deimos, the slower twin moon. Elysia, the caverns that had sheltered the Mons colony. Arcadia, the plains where humanity first struck root. Borealis, the frozen pole that kept Russians alive. Ares, the god of struggle, the planet's ancient name. Dustfall, for the storms that had tested them all. Crimson, the endless dust beneath their feet. Aurora, the shimmering lights that blessed the poles. And 1 month they left unchanged. March, a single fragile thread tied to Earth, a reminder of where they had come from. The chamber doors open. Settlers gathered beneath the dome. The 3 commanders stepped out together. No flags, no rivalry, only unity. Voss's voice cut through the hush, steady and resolute. From this day forward, we will no longer live by Earth's clock. Mars has its own rhythm, its own time. Lynn spoke next, soft but commanding. The birth of the first Martian child marks not only a new life, but the first day of a new year. The first year of Mars. Karpov added his weighty words, firm yet full of warmth. We are no longer only visitors here. We are settlers. We are Martians. Cheers erupted. Laughter and applause filled the dome, echoing into the halls. Settlers held the newborn, passing blessings in every tongue. For a moment, Mars was not dust and struggle. Mars was home with its own identity. But beyond the glass, the truth waited. On Mars, it felt like the dawn of a new history. On Earth, it looked like defiance. Washington, Beijing, Moscow. None welcomed a world that dared to count its own days. Unity for the settlers, rebellion in the eyes of their governments. The silence between the 2 worlds grew, heavy as the dust that never settled. Commander Voss stood at the center, steady, unshaken. But the years ahead would test him and all of Mars in ways no plan or calendar could predict. The question was no longer whether life could survive here. The question was whether Mars itself could survive what came next.